Hello, I'm Diane Hirshberg from the University of Alaska Anchorage Institute of Social and Economic Research.
And I'm Tuija Turunen from University of Lapland and the Professor of Teacher Education here in Finland.
And we are talking today about a project that we have funded by the U.S. Embassy in Finland called Teacher Education for Social Justice and Diversity in a Post-COVID-19 New Future.
Yes.
Tuija and I were lucky enough to receive this funding when we first thought the pandemic might be slowing down. And after a couple of delays, we're finally able to be together and to start looking at what we can learn from the pandemic in order to strengthen our practice in schools and in particular teacher education practice. So maybe I think it'd be nice for us to start with talking about some of the challenges that we heard that were faced by students and educators around access to technology with COVID-19.
Yes, I think that was broadly discussed throughout the globe, that there was big difference for some families. They could provide all the electronic and internet access and everything, and then quite in the same areas actually there were families that were not able to do that, and there were different solutions for different parts in the world. We have heard that there were teachers taking packages like books and notes to the doors, and then here in Rovaniemi, the city actually provided the personal equipment for all the children at school and young people, but that of course didn't solve the internet access problem. So that was, I think that perhaps the first thing that came out, that people don't have equal access to technology and internet.
Yes, we heard some stories in Alaska. Of course, Alaska is a very huge and diverse state in terms of the geography and access. And in Anchorage, where I live, it's the largest city. And even there were plenty of homes that didn't have internet access. They actually equipped a school bus and drove around the school bus so that it could provide intranet access to some of the homes. But I also heard about, for college students going and sitting in the parking lots at the university in the middle of winter so they could get access.
Yes. And then some families and some teachers told that because the students didn't have any equipment, they actually took the children to walk outside and had the social distancing, but could walk and talk while they were having the walking.
Yes.
So I think that was actually quite innovative way.
Absolutely. Yes, there were many creative approaches for providing technology and internet access. Of course, again, we have a problem also in parts of Alaska where we have parents who themselves did not graduate from high school or college, that they're not, in some households, parents could set up a laptop, could help the child navigate, and in others, they hadn't used the technology that much themselves. And so we had some interesting challenges with educators training the parents as the children.
Yeah, that happened here as well.
Yeah.
And the families were learning together with their kids often and realizing that how much possibilities the network actually might provide.
So I guess this is one of those places where what would you see as solutions? I shouldn't say solutions. What would you say could be some innovations in terms of access and technology that we might want to think about building into our teacher education programs?
I think that the one thing that comes to my mind is the mobile technology, and it has been existing, but with developing the technologies and with pandemic, I think that it has kind of coming more obvious that actually with quite cheap device you could do a fair bit of learning as well.
It's true. I think about my husband had to teach me how to connect my mobile phone to my computer so that in some cases I could have more access.
Yes.
In places where there might not be wireless, and that's it seems so logical, and yet we forget that that's an opportunity.
Yes, and also using the mobile phone, taking photos, having it with you, and sharing the experience with others who are online.
Right.
So that is something that we can and is more used at the moment.
So there are also, of course, challenges that are faced by students and educators that have to do with teaching and learning online.
Yeah.
So what are some of the challenges that you saw in that area?
Yes. I actually had a chat with some of our student teachers yesterday and asked about this, and they said that the pedagogies need to be different. Just a talking head, talking to the emptiness, or even reading from the slides is very boring. Mm-hmm. And there should be pedagogies to have a variety in an online class where you can group students and share between each other and so on. So their message was very clear that the pedagogies need to be developed, and there are very many good signs already, and lots of at least the teacher educators in here at the University of Lapland are thinking about how to do it differently, but it takes some time, and still the students say that sometimes it's like talking head. But then of course there's a challenge there that if you do the recording, so the students are not there at the same time. So how do you then provide possibilities to social networking and social learning from each other?
You know, that's one of the real challenges. Like, I have been teaching online for years, but I've always taught synchronous. I've never taught an asynchronous online course, and I have colleagues who have really, I think, developed some innovative approaches to recording themselves. For example, using much shorter lectures.
Yes.
Not having a 1 hour recording, but having 5 or 10 minute recordings.
Yeah.
And then having other activities that students need to do on their own and in partnership with students they can assign. When I teach synchronously, of course, it's very different because they're there. The technology allows you to, like you said, break people into smaller groups for discussion. And I also had long ago when I first started doing this, one of my Indigenous students said she preferred the online technology because it was the early iterations where you couldn't even have more than one person talk at a time.
Okay. Yeah.
And for her, it allowed her to think before she spoke, and it allowed her to speak without being interrupted. And it was a very different experience from being in a classroom with very verbal Westerners who interrupt and talk over each other.
Yeah. And that is also something that if you design the pedagogies differently, and I think that that's what is needed there, then you can allow the students, kids at school or students in higher education institutions to actually have their own personal learning environment where they can set up the time and pace for their learning rather than going with the bigger group. But that needs a lot of free thinking.
Yes.
And also when we're thinking our workloads, it's a different thing to do maybe 5-10 minute short recordings or having an hour lecture. There are two different things, and you have to think differently.
And I also think we tend to think about helping our students learn how to do this work, but it's a lot of work for faculty to learn how to do this ourselves in order to model it and teach it to others. And I know my university has really good support for online teaching and learning, but not everybody realizes it's there or takes advantage of it, and it does make a difference. But the other piece I think about is I noticed a difference teaching online with graduate students versus undergraduate students. Because graduate students, older students had some of the social learning with each other, perhaps a different level of motivation, because if they're in a graduate professional degree program, they know why they're there.
Yes.
Undergraduates might be less focused, have fewer, they don't have as many skills in their basket to pull out when they're learning on their own.
Yes.
And there is something, even in the best online learning experience, you are still sitting quite often by yourself, or perhaps you're sitting with your siblings and your parents or your children interrupting you as you try to do your learning. So I'm wondering if you've heard about any strategies, especially with younger children, to help them engage.
Yes, it's we actually have an ongoing project, Transatlantic Platform, where we have been doing some research with young children and their teachers about online Sami language classes, and that was that the teachers started to rethink their practice, and they brought in some elements of your very traditional Sami pedagogy to online class, and they used traditional storytelling, and they used place-based learning, and there they actually, with the place-based learning, the kids went outside, took photos, and then shared those photos and told about those important places for the other students. So it's it is very much possible, and the teachers were actually they just needed a little bit of time to reflect their practice, and then they and to think what they want to try on, and with those innovations, it was very clear that it is possible, and the children were very engaged, and they were from 5 to 6, 8. But then again, if you instead have a talking head, and the kids are sitting there and they don't even want to open their mouth because they're scared of talking. So that's a different thing, and I think that the icebreaker thing is also needed for adults or university students, so that they come over the barrier of opening the microphone, opening the camera. All those little, they're actually technical things, but they have great impact on what's happening pedagogically in those situations.
Yes, and I do think sometimes we want to be flexible and acknowledge that you need to turn off the camera and the audio again if your child has run into the room or if some other thing is going on. But asking people to be there with the camera on is very, very important, I think.
Yeah, yes. Yes, it is, but then, and that is true, but then there were some discussions about the privacy of kids if they open the camera and they show their home, and some there were some advices around that maybe you check what is in your background, and that is understandable.
Yeah. And maybe even something as simple as, if they're concerned, can they find a sheet or a towel or something you can hang behind where it creates a bit of a private space. Because not everybody has a whole lot of room. I saw a picture that was shared by a very well-respected researcher in New Zealand, and her computer was on a bookcase, and she was standing in front of the bookcase with a window behind her.
Oh, wonderful. Yes, it's a kind of small things.
Yes.
But you need to think about that, and also understand that why someone don't want to share their private spaces, and especially if you are doing the recording, because the recording is there, and that is actually a window to your home, and for some people it's not okay.
No. So what are some of the learnings that you think we really should be thinking about in restructuring teacher education programs?
That is interesting. I asked that also from the students, and they said that they need more skills to do quality digital teaching and learning spaces. And there was one quite good statement that also they need the skills or to know when the digital online is a good thing and when it's not. So there is place for both of them. There needs to be a personal interaction and contact, and there are the things that are important. But then there are also places and times for this online, and this combination. I think that was the thing that they were really thinking, that how to combine, what is the good combination, and then how do you learn to make those personal learning spaces for your students at school. And quite frankly saying, I think that we are not doing that perfectly now, so that's something that needs to be developed.
You know, in my teaching, it's always been either fully online or fully in person, and now we're looking at what are flexible ways to do this. But some of my colleagues have always started, even when they're teaching an online class, they'll start with 1 week in person. And this is particularly when students are at different locations. So people come together and spend a few days and building a community and then sending them off in separate spaces. It's much easier because they've made those connections. So, much like when we worked together, we had already met in person. And so, yes, it's an 11-hour time difference and thousands of miles, and yet the relationship was there, so that we pick up where we left off. It's not starting anew.
Yes, but because in this network we have researchers all around the Circumpolar North and also in Global South. During the pandemic, which was 2 years, we actually got to know people only via those frames. And last week there were people who actually were thinking that, okay, have I never seen you in person? Or was it always via the frame? So somehow we are also learning to be in the digital world, and what opportunities that might provide with avatars and everything in the future.
Yes. And of course, given the challenges of climate change, and we're trying to reduce our carbon footprint, being able to do more work digitally is actually better for the globe. But there's still something about in-person interactions that I think are of value.
Yeah.
So we don't want to completely eliminate the in-person. And I think that's true with our students too, that they need time to develop a different kind of relationship. I mean, even those personal stories about where your grandparents may be from.
Yeah.
Or those other kinds of shared experiences that aren't easily anticipated when you're only online for some short period of time.
That is different because you don't, you can, but you often don't have a cup of coffee while you are in an online event. It's very strict. And the other thing that I realize is that with the online, we know exactly that, I'm sorry, I'm 2 minutes late.
Yes.
But in a real world, it does really not matter.
No. I also, I feel like when we are online, other things pop up on the screen. You know, yes, we all try to be good. And when we are not in the same place, then other parts of your life come in. So when I watched a class of little children, and you would hope they could focus, and yet one was handed their baby brother, and another had their older sister come in and say, I need the laptop, my class is starting. And there was a lot of those kinds of interruptions that if you have children in your physical class, you're in control of that classroom.
Yeah. Yes, that is right.
And so it's an interesting challenge to think about how do we keep that focus on learning and teaching, and respect that we are all have other lives that will interfere.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah. What do you think about the policy implications of all of this that we are learning?
Yes, I think that there are changes that are needed that might prove to be quite difficult to change, like structures of the school days and structures of if you're a teacher, your working load. How do you do it differently? Or what is required, and where the teacher is actually needed, and where maybe a school assistant could be help, and all those kind of policy level things. And it's really about the curriculum frame. In Finland we have the national framework curriculum, and then all places do their own. So what is in there, and then what is in practice in schools, and it will be interesting to see if this pandemic has that will have an impact on our curriculum. But it's quite many levels. But then, having said that, I think that a school leadership has actually is fairly important element of the policy. And if that person is flexible and seeing possibilities rather than challenges, it might make it easier to find diverse ways of doing things. And that is maybe something important learning, that there are different ways, and that's fine.
I also think about the resources. You know, I mean, policymakers. If I think about our elected officials, they are the people with the budgetary control and access. And for them to think about not assuming that every child has access to the same resources, and how do we equitably provide what's needed so that they can truly engage at the level that is needed. And I also think another piece of the policy, and I'm thinking about this is where school leadership is so important, is to make sure that educators realize that just because you can be connected 24 hours a day does not mean that you should be.
Yeah.
And that for students to understand that just because we can be connected 24 hours a day does not mean we're going to respond to you 24 hours a day. I think those boundaries have really been sometimes hard to set
Yes, yeah.
in the digital world, that students email on a Sunday and say, I need a meeting with you today.
Yeah.
Or I need a meeting with you tomorrow. And it's like, well, no, actually, you need to ask me what my schedule is.
Yes, that's right.
I think there's a lot of challenges in learning how to communicate appropriately and respectfully in a digital world.
Yes, and what you expect from others, and what are you ready to make yourself, and I think that they're all, again, they come to the diverse ways of doing things.
Yeah.
So that if some people work late in the evening, some people don't. They start early in the morning,
Right.
and somewhere with this digital means they meet in between.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes it means that we meet at odd times if we're doing transnational work, but it's also huge opportunities then. I in my professional life would not be talking regularly to people in Ethiopia and New Zealand and at the top of Finland if it were not for this digital platform that we can work across.
Yes, and suddenly the projects were moved to online mode, and that is also the learning. I think that the young people have already learned that the globe is fairly small, and you can be in touch with other people quite easily. And one thing that we could actually do in educational setting is to be connected to other kids in the other countries, and because it's easy, and they can play some internet games or send photos or whatever, and then they can learn that there are young people around the globe sharing sometimes very similar things and sometimes very different things, and they can learn from that.
Yes. Yeah, there's always been those little projects about people sending postcards to different places. Well, now we don't have to send a postcard, we can chat.
Yes, yes, that's right.
But it means we need to figure out how to make the connections.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything else that we might want to bring up about all of these digital opportunities?
Probably there is, but but it needs to be thinking, and also I'm very keen on this and curious about the future, because the technology is developing so fast.
Yes.
That and it becomes cheaper and more affordable for people. So let's see where we are sitting in a year from this.
Absolutely. Well, this was a fun conversation.
Yes,
and
thank you, Diane.
I want to thank again our funders from the U.S. Embassy in Helsinki. And we'll pick this conversation up again perhaps in Alaska.
Yes, that is the plan, that we will continue the discussions, and then I have seen more the Alaska and how the things are there, and it's a very different location indeed.
Yes.
Yes.
All right.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.